Now to an investigation by the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife into illegally harvested catfish.
Yes, folks, you heard it right. Illegally harvested catfish. Hey, folks, I'm Dieter Melhorn. Welcome to the Dieter Melhorn Fishing Podcast. Yeah, this is a story that's pretty interesting. Any of y'all that have followed my channel may have heard about paylakes, and there's a bunch of people that may not be into the catfishing world, the paylake world. You don't know what a paylake is. So let me start by letting everyone know what a paylake is. A paylake is a private pond, a private lake. Usually they're maybe an acre to 5 acres in size. They're on private property, and they're basically a business. It is a fishing business. People pay to fish there. In some of them, they have trout. Some of them, they have catfish. Some of them, they have carp. And they vary in how they work and how they're structured. Some of them, it's a pay-to-keep kind of deals. You may pay by the pound. You may pay by the fish. But in a lot of them, they are a competitive place to where you go there and compete. You enter into a tournament scenario. You pay so much money to fish a certain area, and they have multiple payouts and prizes over a period of time. Sometimes it's the biggest for the day, biggest for the week, biggest for the month, biggest for the hour. It really just varies. But the bottom line is that's what a paylake is. Now, there's a lot of controversy around them because some of them get their fish from farms, fish farms, and they bring them in by the truckload. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things this accused lake, shows on their Facebook page is them buying American-made, American-raised catfish that they bring in. And really, in both regards, these fish are American-raised. It's just one of them, as they claim, comes from a private lake. And the ones in question here that are in this news story come from public waters. And what happened here was there was an investigation that started out in Kentucky by Kentucky Fish and Wildlife. And it was concerning the transportation and sale of fish to a pay lake there in Kentucky, Glasgow, Kentucky. What they found out was, from what we can tell, they've been somewhat limited with how much information's been given out so far. There's a press release, which I'm going to put up on the screen and let you look at, from Kentucky Fish and Wildlife. None of the people who were charged, we don't know if they were arrested or not, but none of them were named, and there were no mugshots on them. I don't know if they were actually taken in custody and processed into jail, because these are misdemeanor charges. And sometimes in these situations, depending on the severity of the charges, and we're going to get more into that in a minute, you're not taken to jail, so there'd be no mugshots. They also failed to mention who the owner of the pay lake was that was charged. He was also charged in all this. I believe in total there were 9 people that were charged, and I think it's about 160 charges. It'll mention in one of these articles. As a matter of fact, let's let the rest of this story roll here from this news station.
Now to an investigation by the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife into illegally harvested catfish. It has led to 180 different charges for 9 people, according to a Facebook post from Kentucky Fish and Wildlife. An investigation over the course of this year has uncovered 71 separate instances of live catfish being harvested from Barren River Lake and sold to a pay lake in Glasgow. The charges allege the owner of the pay lake knowingly purchased the catfish from people who were not licensed commercial fishermen. 2 separate commercially licensed fishermen also allegedly harvested trophy-sized catfish from Alabama and sold them to the same pay lake operator. Alabama law prohibits the transport of trophy-sized catfish outside their state lines. Together, 9 different people are facing 180 fish and wildlife-related charges in Kentucky and in numerous other states.
So, yeah, this was a pretty complex investigation. I think once the officers in Kentucky realized the span, they started to look outside of Kentucky. And the actual lake that these fish were caught in was in Alabama. And that's where it gets kind of interesting in that Alabama has some laws in place that prevent the transport of certain fish out of the state. And I think in this case it may have been some fish that were trophy-sized fish. Again, the thing is, when all the charges that they're talking about, none are listed individually. I don't know if that's going to come out at a later time. They may have honestly not thought it was a big deal, and in the whole big scheme of things, all of that particulars may not be important for us in the catfish community. It's important to see what these folks are charged with, but it also involved U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and you may wonder, well, why did that take place? Well, part of it is if these fish are being moved from Alabama through Tennessee into Kentucky, it starts to become a national deal, and depending on what happens with the type of fish and whether they're game fish and some of that stuff and how the laws applies, it can become a Lacey Act violation. Now, we've seen no indication that any Lacey Act violation took place, but generally speaking, a Lacey Act violation is when you have a game fish that is taken, possibly caught illegally, harvested illegally, or it can apply to whitetail deer, elk, any game animal that is transported, harvested illegally across state lines. There's no indication yet that that's where the charges. Again, we don't know what all the charges are in this story, but it's interesting that they're paying attention to this and putting some emphasis on it. One of the biggest complaints in the catfish world is that nothing's being done about paylakes. And as we've said before, in a lot of places, there's no regulation on paylakes. In a lot of places, there is nothing prohibiting somebody catching a 50-pound catfish from public water and selling it to a private lake. Some places have regulations, some do not. Apparently, there was some issues here where the law was broken. Now, from what I've read, everything is a misdemeanor. I said it earlier. The indications are that the charges that were brought forth were all misdemeanors. Hopefully, we're going to see some more on this and find out what the actual charges were. Now, the lake in question is Green Valley Pay Lake. I had to do some digging to find this out. I found an article of Michael Cramerton on Glasgow News, and he goes on to say that he spoke with Cody Cox, who is the game warden that basically started this case. He's with their Special Investigations Unit, and Fox said that the pay lake in question was Green Valley Pay Lake there in Glasgow. Now, how many fish are we talking? How widespread was this? Is this a one-time incident? From what that article goes on to say, it was 71 separate incidents, and we're talking about over 3 tons of catfish. That's right, folks, over 6,000 pounds of catfish. And some of you that may not be into the fishing community may wonder, well, I mean, what's the big deal in doing this? Well, for one, you're taking the biggest of the big fish, apex predators, out of the water, and you're moving them to a place where they're going to die in very short order. One thing that folks that are not familiar with pay lakes probably don't know and don't understand, and honestly, this is even the people who are fishing in these pay lakes probably do not realize this. In many of these pay lakes, these fish die within a couple of months of being in there. The problem is, one, oxygen levels can be very low in many of them, especially the ones that don't have proper aeration. The other thing is food. There's not a really good food source, sustainable food source in any of these lakes. A lot of them are stocked at rates higher than the carrying capacity for the lake. And when that happens, any type of, one, there's food issues. 2, oxygen issues come into play. And if there's any type of bacteria or disease that, the fish come in contact with, because remember, these fish are being brought in from different places, different bodies of water, different stuff that can be introduced into these ponds, it spreads quickly throughout the fish. The bottom line is they're not a sustainable place to keep fish and grow fish. It would be one thing if you put a 40-pound fish in a 3-acre lake, there was some bluegill, brim, crappie swimming around, it had something to eat, it would be fine. But when you stack thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of these fish in there, they're going to die. And many of them do die in very short order. So that's one of the downsides to it. The other thing is just the legalities. And like I said, in some places, this is illegal. In some places, it's not. And it just depends on where you're at, what the laws are in the area that you're fishing. So you've probably seen these places around. Some of them are totally legit. I fished one when I was a kid, Bearcat Lake over near Charlotte, and they brought in fish from Fish Farm, little bullheads that were about that long. You could go in there and catch them, and I think I forget how many you could catch and keep. But there are some that are doing the trophy fish thing. So it's interesting that they are actually pursuing and prosecuting people, because that's been one of the biggest issues with the pay lakes and with the laws. And the complaint is that they don't enforce it. And quite honestly, you can't enforce everything when it comes to wildlife. The biggest thing is that when they're able to bust somebody and catch them, it gets publicity like this, and it is a deterrent. Laws are more of a deterrent than anything. And the fact that they are seeing people being charged here with a lot of crime. I mean, it's a lot of charges. It sends a message that somebody's looking, somebody's watching, something's going on. So communicating some of this stuff to your wildlife people when you know what's going on, it's a good thing to do. And I think more we get the word out there. Hopefully, Fish and Wildlife Kentucky, if you're watching, I'd love to hear what some of the charges are, and what some of the consequences are, and when this is going to trial, and if anybody was arrested. So if any of you guys are watching, or any of you folks that are watching out there, send me an email. Email's down in the comment or in the description section below. And I'd love to get your feedback on this. How many of you had no clue this was going on and had no clue what a pay lake was? And how many of you may be from that area and know what is going on at that lake? If you've been out there, I know a lot of the stuff on their Facebook page now is, they're probably doing some damage control. It's a lot of, farm raised fish that they're showing being put into these lakes. So it'll be interesting to see how this turns out. Again, these are, all charges. I don't think it's gone to trial yet. I don't think anybody's pled anything down and paid anything yet. So they'll remain accused until proven innocent. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, if you're from that area and are following this, let us know in the comment section. Let me know privately. Send me a message. I'd love to hear more about it and see, how all this pans out. So appreciate you guys checking it out. We'll catch you out on the water.